it is what it is. There's a conventional wisdom, and then there's something that's challenging it. And over time, it's either going to be, I'm not even saying that I'm right, Martin. What I am saying is that at least there's an introduction of an idea that is challenging groupthink. And the results we're starting to see that we've seen over a long, long period of time now, Martin, is it's clear that there's an over dependence on carbohydrate-based strategies in this sport, and an under-reliance, an underutilization of the power of having a somewhat fat-adapted soccer athlete. So.
Good morning, Steve. Thanks for being with us. How are you today?
I'm good, Martin. Good morning. It's good to see you, man.
No, it's my pleasure. You probably don't know, but it's the moment to tell you that I didn't know much about you until I heard your colleagues saying only bad things about you.
Perfect.
And then a few podcasts. As you can imagine, a few podcasts, when you get to know people.
Yeah.
And I remember you were the first to mention this crazy organization tool. It's called Asana. Yep. To my ears, It was in a podcast, I think with Rob.
Yep. Started
with this, and I said, this guy has good ideas, and I'm using it as well in terms of organization.
Nice.
And then I was fascinated by other stuff I heard from you, and I have way more questions for you today about what you're doing about the carbohydrate restriction, and of course a lot.
Yeah.
But maybe let's start by a quick introduction of yourself, by yourself, if you don't mind.
No problem. My name's Steve Tashjian. I'm a physical therapist and performance manager, and I graduated in 2002 with my master's in physical therapy, and then just took advantage of the blessings that get put in front of you at moments in time, with my very first job coming out of school being with Jim Liston, who was at the time the head fitness coach for the LA Galaxy, and just instantly was able to start the path in professional sport, in the sport that I really at that point had loved the most, and that was the trajectory, that was starting point for the trajectory. I've spent some time there. I spent some time in private practice on my own, starting a performance and physical therapy facility down in San Diego with some friends of mine. And then returned to professional sport around 2007 with Ziggy Schmidt in Columbus, 2007 to 2009. And then I had the chance to go abroad at that point, and I had the fortunate interaction with some folks at Everton while we were on preseason with the crew for a couple of years. And then that rolled into an opportunity to work for them full time. And through Athletes Performance, I was brought in as a sports scientist and performance coach with them from 2009 until 2014. When I returned to the United States, it wasn't purposeful to go back to the crew, but that's how it ended up working itself out. That was the moment where I had the first opportunity to work as a high performance director and oversee all elements of player health and wellness, and then started my journey with Greg Berhalter. And once he was hired with the men's team in 2000, at the end of 2018, beginning 2019, I came to the national team with him. And I think, like most of us, Martin, we try to work to our strengths. We try to do our best to maintain a good reputation, and then we let circumstance and a little bit of luck take the rest of it. And I think that's probably my profile, just like many of us that you've probably interviewed on the show. It's just you take your chances when they come, you make your best of it, and then you're hoping that it does some good for the people you're working with, and then it moves you on to the next opportunity to interact with more people. So I've been blessed to be at the point where we're at right now.
You mentioned luck, but I think as we always say, you create the luck, you create the opportunities, and I think there's always a kind of wisdom that I hear from your words in those interviews. I have to confess something as well. You also participated to the ego book that we wrote last year.
Correct.
And of course, you were super kind enough to respond. And we kind of almost used as a central aspect of it the concept of ego volumes, which comes that's the word coming from you. And we had that anyway in the book about having some time to need to shut this volume down and up. But so I would say that you have been very influential to me based on that, for that book and other things. So would you say that this wisdom, and as you said, this ability to just take opportunities as they come, that comes from the fact that, I don't know, is there anything you can relate to your youth about that, about willing to be open and putting the person first?
It was a journey for me. I'll say that, because I think the best way to get to any side of the spectrum is because you've spent a lot of time on the opposite side of the spectrum. So I always think of the phrase, sometimes you have to hit rock bottom before you rise to the top. And I don't think that's necessarily accurate. I don't think you hit rock bottom. I think you bounce off the bottom, Martin, And that's why sometimes to get to one place, and I'm flattered by your words, honestly I am, because I didn't, patience and awareness was not a way to describe me when I was younger. But at the same time, unless you have this contrast to hold yourself to, it's very difficult to understand or gain an awareness of who you are, what you're doing, or what needs to change. And I think that was a part of it. And I went to Everton at the right time. I think skill-wise, practitioner-wise, I was really confident in who I was and what I can do. But, the last piece that I needed was to really understand how to manage human beings and how to.
Exactly.
It wasn't something I was prepared for. And Danny Donachie deserves a lot of credit. He was the head of medical when I was at Everton, and a sage as I see him, and really calm, unbelievable, incredible awareness of the way he influences individuals in his interactions, and then just the calm that he approaches how he listens is really, really impressive. So I think if I was to use him as a mirror, I could clearly see flaws without a doubt. And then just having the opportunity to, speak to him and have, really, really good conversations about really, moving past the surface crust of who I was at the moment and getting into some real deeper understandings of how I affect people with my behavior was probably molded there, the starting point for it. So I didn't have it my whole life. I think there was people in my life that had it, and I can reflect on how they handled things as I think back on it now. But no, it came much more from bouncing off the bottom, and then really having people around me to help me, fine tune that skill set. That came last for me, Martin.
Excellent. Yeah, but again, I see that. And on something you just said about you have to have an understanding on one side to be able to do well on the other side. Would that apply as well to how your role has evolved? Like, there's those stories about those jobs, the titles. Everyone wants to be the head of, or having a bigger department, because you have the feeling that you have maybe sometime a bigger impact because you touch more, from being just a physio. And when I say just, there's obviously nothing negative behind that, but when you're focused on something versus managing, then you have the physio versus the conditioning, you bring the sports science inside. So where do you put yourself in your journey into having a bit of understanding about everything?
Yeah, I think it does apply, because by the time I got back to the Columbus Crew with Greg in 2014, I had been a strength coach as an assistant. I'd been a head strength coach. I'd been, an apprentice when it came to on-field fitness work. And then I had the role of, really the responsibility of being the head fitness coach in a club. I had been a physical therapist in private practice. I had been a physical therapist in the professional setting. I had managed return to play. I had managed medical departments, but I had done them in components. And as I'd been the head of sports science at Everton in the last couple of years I was there. So I was in these positions where I gradually gained, exposure to the path of mastery in all these individual areas. I use the word mastery loosely. And then by the time you get to this point where you're like, okay, I really feel like now I've been in every component, and now I know how I would bring it together. It speaks to that spectrum idea. I can't know how to manage this particular area until I've been in this area and I've worked in it and I've done the hours and felt what it feels like. And then you can start to understand how to manage all those individuals together as one collective performance department. So I do think it reflects a lot of how I got to where I am is, you spend the time doing the work in all the individual roles before you really have an idea. Now I know how to bring all these things together. And the title thing is interesting, Martin, because I think what I've seen, and it's unfortunate, that there's a race to the title. There's a race to it.
Of course.
And I've collectively seen a lot of people convince others to give them the title, and they weren't ready for it. And there's two things that happened. One, all they paid attention to was the title. They got the title, weren't ready, and also weren't getting paid what they should be getting paid for that title. And now it's not just high performance director or performance manager titles. That's not it. Now everyone wants to have this new title that's coming up, vice president of performance or VP of health and wellness. Well, the first thing I'd say is at that point, it's still a race for the title unless you truly understand the comprehensiveness of that particular role. And then on top of it, they're getting shortchanged because the first conversation you should have if an individual comes to you from the executive branch and says, we want to make you a vice president, and then you're starting to go through the payment packages, first thing I'd ask is, well, let's start where all your other VPs are. If I'm a VP, I'm a VP. If I'm not, I'm not. But at the end of the day, what's happening is if an individual is in a place where they're making 150, 170 grand a year, and they are now pushing to make 200 or 220 grand a year, the way the organizations are getting away with the promotion is they're going, hey, we're going to make you a VP. We're going to pay 190, but we're going to make you a VP. And the ego from your book, from what we've seen, all of a sudden, oh, I might be the first VP. This is kind of nice. Well, now you just ruined it for everybody else that's going to become a VP down the road. The whole process is a race. It's a race to a title rather than the understanding of how can I use this role to change performance in professional sport? How can I do it to evolve the process of what we're doing, make it more relevant so that within the construct of professional sport, both from the general manager level and the executive presidential level down, they understand the importance of the impact the role can have across an entire organization when it's vertical, when it's really integrated. That whole process, that's the goal. The title isn't the role. Call it whatever you want. In the end, the goal is total vertical integration and understanding of the way it strengthens a club when you put the efforts and the resources into doing that. So I totally agree with you. That we're in a really interesting situation right now, and I think we've got really talented young performance managers who just need to put their foot on the brakes, stay in the role they're in, and just understand how well it's gonna. They're in a point where they're at a certain stage in a book of their own life about how they're getting to mastery. Like, don't rush it. Like, relax. Everybody else around you is getting promotions and moving to these different positions and taking these different titles, and your time will come. And don't skip steps. Like, that's what I see happening right now. Is people are skipping steps like crazy.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I just can't agree more. And back to, as you said about, of course, the title is just something that comes with it, but it's definitely not the aim. What has been your main drive? Is it related to the impact? Trying to find where you can have the biggest impact? Do you have a bigger impact being in a higher position? How do you see things?
Yeah, I think it comes down to people's gifts. Um, I know just based on my own path, there are certain areas where, even though I've maybe been in a managerial role, I've still maintained certain responsibilities as a practitioner. But there's other areas where I haven't maintained, that skill set as a practitioner. And what I'm finding is that I'm becoming more and more impactful, as you say, when I'm in a position to lead teams of people. And I think that's where things are gravitating for me personally at the moment. And that's where I put my efforts. But because of what you said, like I feel like I would rather be in a position where I'm having maximal impact. And again, a title really doesn't matter a whole lot. It's the role and the responsibilities. Darcy's a great guy to use as an example of this. He could be doing all of our jobs, but in the end,
Sure.
he chose to really dive in, and his role is to be a performance coach. Like, he is a practitioner right now. That's what he knows his role is with us, and he accepts it in the most humble way, and he does it with all of his heart. And he does it because he wants to have an impact in this particular team, in this particular department, using what I think is an incredible gift of his, which is just the ability to see movement and performance in a certain way and really dive into making people better movers. That's what I asked him if he would be willing to do. And he's like, yeah, let's do it. It wasn't a very long conversation, but for the most part, he's a great example of that particular mindset of, what's my gift? What are my skill sets? Where am I at right now in my pathway to mastery? And how can I just maximize my impact right now?
That's brilliant. And when it comes to building those interdisciplinary teams, we often discuss about how many staff provides the right balance. I've been into some organization, or I've been consulting some organization where we have 10 physios or 8 physios, 3 conditioning coaches, 1 nutritionist, 3 sports science. How do you see that? Is there a magic and optimal number, or how do you feel comfortable leading a team like that?
It's like a snowflake, man. They're all different. Every circumstance is going to be different. And what ends up getting skipped in the whole process of trying to get to what the right answer is for your club is the discovery part of it. Like, I think it gets skipped all the time. What does your club stand for? What's its identity? And then once you know the club's identity, you have to start asking questions. How do you want high performance to impact your identity? How do you want high performance to impact the trajectory your club is on to achieve the goals your club has, whether it's on the business side or it's on the competitive side? It doesn't matter. But you can't start with, in a silo, this is where I think we should be. Let's make the whole club and the whole competitive, process revolve around how we set this up. That doesn't work. I think in the end, you have to understand, from the top down, what the key, character traits are. These really important values that the competitive side of the club is going to operate on, and then from there, you'd have to mold what the performance department is going to look like. I think you've got certain teams in certain situations where, a big group is going to throw off the identity of the club. Everton is a great example of that. Everton was a very, very tight family-based club. It was an organization that prides itself on the heartbeat that it possesses as a part of its, a core of its strength. Well, when you start adding pieces, to a really tight core of people, you tend to run the risk of diluting the message, of diluting the passion. And that's something you have to be aware of. I don't think a huge staff would have been the answer at Everton Football Club at the time that I was there. Instead, it was really agile practitioners. It was individuals that understand each other really well. It functioned better when it stayed tight. And that would have been a mistake, I think, to take that particular club and expand the staff beyond that really agile, small number of people that were able to execute that, their roles and responsibilities really well. I think that would have been a mistake. But then there's other organizations, depending on the size of the rosters, like when you get into the NFL, where understanding that particular environment, manpower could be crucial to those circumstances. And every single one of those sports, every single one of those organizations just has a different DNA. And first thing to do when you're stepping into those is to really, really get a good understanding of that DNA first, and then mold the high performance group to not only the organization, but even to the players themselves. I've been in clubs where it was integral to have this almost department of innovation when it came to performance. Like the club itself was so laser focused on innovation that you knew as the high performance department, we better have somebody, at least one person, or part of their role is about the next millennium. Like that part of their thought process has to be. And so when you pitch that idea, in this particular circumstance, there's an organization that I was working with. I just thought, I think it's vital that you think about putting resources towards this particular type of individual. And they did. They loved it. They loved the idea. And now that one department by itself, this Department of Performance Innovation, is now 3-4 people deep. Like but it's a part of the high performance department. It's just grown over time because it fit with that model for that club. There's other clubs where you'd bring it as an idea and they'd go, this has nothing to do with our business model. This is not who we are as a club. It just doesn't fit. So over time, I think the discovery process in the beginning is where people need to start. And in the end, what ends up happening is you get this really comfortable, natural evolution of how a high performance department fits into the goals of the entire organization.
Yeah, and I think it's central to say about this discovery path and starting from the inside rather than having this new owner coming and say, okay, let's hire more people. I think we have a nice parallel with technology as well. When you come with more money and resources, you always think that just piling more people or piling more technology would make a difference. But when it's not integrated, when there is no coherence, it's actually sometimes it could even be counterproductive.
Yeah, without a doubt, and wasteful, because what you end up getting is stacks of technology in the corner, 3 managers later, 3 high performance directors later, and none of it's getting used.
Yeah, that happens. The more there are changes, and often even more in football, the more this happens.
Yeah.
I want to bring the debate a bit on the ground a little bit more, even though that's an excellent longer intro. But I think what you said is just on the point. As I mentioned in the introduction, one of the first time, I think the first and almost only time I heard about the topic of carbohydrate restriction in football was listening to you. And as the listener of this podcast definitely would know, Paul Lawson, my peer, is a big advocate of that. He just applied that to himself, to all the athletes he coaches. But this is definitely his world is in the individual sport endurance world of triathlon, where they really have, let's say, control of the project. It's one individual who wants to buy into this approach, get fat adapted and so on. And of course they had good results. So I'm very curious to see how you came to applying this model to the very complex context of team sports. And especially this is probably also, I'm already going too much into the question I have, but there's likely a lot of habits and culture around having a big plate of pasta to prepare a game, so there's even more resistance, maybe, So be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance, man. There's a ton of resistance, and I've talked about this a lot before. I totally understand the resistance. I do. It doesn't bother me. I think in most situations, Whether the path I'm on is right or wrong, it's new. We know that. And when new is introduced, it unsettles. It creates a little bit of instability. It's the world is flat. No, the world is round, right? Like, I don't think there's any difference in basic philosophy in this particular understanding. It is what it is. There's a conventional wisdom, and then there's something that's challenging it. And over time, it's either going to be, I'm not even saying that I'm right, Martin. What I am saying is that at least there's an introduction of an idea that is challenging groupthink. And the results we're starting to see that we've seen over a long, long period of time now, Martin, is it's clear that there's an over dependence on carbohydrate-based strategies in this sport, and an under-reliance, an underutilization of the power of having a somewhat fat-adapted soccer athlete. So where this started was in my time back at Everton. There was a period where I was doing some work with the under-23s as well, and over time I just continued to try to put these pieces together. None of it made sense to me. We know how robust of a fuel source fat is. The use of fat adaptation in endurance athletics was pretty clear already at the point where I started kind of diving into the research. And the sport itself of soccer is underpinned by a need for, a massive need for aerobic capacity. So in my head, I was thinking, why would we choose a less efficient fuel source to try to gain this base that we need? Everything we do, even in repeated sprint ability, even in repeated high intensity action, oxygen is so vital to the resynthesis of the energy we need to repeat those high intensity movements that why would we not want a greater O2 content in our blood? Why would we not want greater mitochondrial density in our cells? These are things in my mind. I thought there's got to be a way of incorporating this, because the overall approach that we're taking at the moment just doesn't seem like it's optimal. It seems more like it's driven by industry rather than driven by science and driven by sport. And so I started to dive into it at that point with the under-23s, and there's a small group of guys that had that label. Oh, they're speed guys. They're not slow twitch, they're fast twitch guys. They'll never be able to be endurance fit. They'll never be able to play 90 minutes. It was this like never absolute type talk. And at the time, Alan Stubbs was the under-23 manager, and I just asked him if he would let me work with 5 to 6 players and start to work on this process. And when we really did start to incorporate aspects of glycogen restriction, we started seeing massive changes really fast in these guys. So that group ended up really kind of molding some of the ideas that I eventually started using when I got back to the Columbus Crew. And it was a moment where it was clear. Like we talked about that earlier, as you're kind of getting to a point where you need to be on this end of the spectrum before you can be here. That's really what did it for me. Yeah. And then when we finally had a group of individuals, including head coaches and management, that were behind it, then we knew we could implement it on a team level. And there's various areas of this that are important, Martin. There's the basic idea that if your energy requirements are low, then your carbohydrate requirements should be low. And if your energy requirements are high, then you can increase your carbohydrate content. That's one very simple model to get maybe a base metabolic process started, where the human physiology is starting to adapt to burning fat, which is not something that happens very easily. And then the other step of it is you also need times where you're actually training at high volumes under depletion. Those are two really vital branches to this whole thing. And to get it right, you really need a massive amount of support from the top down, and you need solidarity. I think that was one thing that was really impressive about the way we did it, is coaches did it, staff did it, so that the players felt supported and we were all in this together. I don't think it ever would have been successful if we didn't do it that way. And then, once you get to a place where you feel like the ground level was laid, then you just start to try to improve it year after year and after year. And it became clear to us when the players were reporting the differences that they feel. And here we are years later, and I've got players that are at different clubs that that I don't manage anymore, that still have remained devout religiously to this form of nutrition. So that's been excellent. With the national team, it's much more difficult. They're coming from so many different environments that we knew that it was going to be create instability that we didn't want, and we had to cater to groups that were open to it, teach them it, give them an understanding of how to implement it, do a better job of communicating it to their clubs also, because they're not our players. And in the end, it's something that happens on a much more slow drip level at the national team level. But with the work we did in Columbus, it was clear. We led the league 4 out of the 5 years I was there. We led the league in total distance covered, high intensity distance covered in games. So there is no argument really to say that it can't be done or that it's detrimental to the performance variables. And then we could go on and on about how quickly it allows the body to recover from high intensity work. The benefits are outrageous, Martin. And I think it's within 10 years, I think you're going to see it much more widespread throughout team sport.
Okay, no, that's excellent. I have a lot of questions on the back of what you just said. I was just listening. I said another one. So I think let's say the rationale behind makes sense at different levels. The first question is, at the moment, the only, let's say, your KPIs, or how do you can say that it works, or that kind of convince you that you were on the right track. You just mentioned distance covered, players' feedback. What else? What helps you to say, okay, we have something to convince that you were doing something interesting?
I think we're probably still moving towards the opportunity to gain a much more convincing KPI, for sure. That was missing on an objective level. The good thing we had was we had comparisons of those same match-based metrics the year before we implemented, the year before we started implementing this strategy. And so that we felt was pretty powerful. What I do say to a lot of folks is, even on the base layer, Martin, if we compared our match statistics from 2014, 2015, and there was no difference, it was exactly the same. No worse, no better. Mm-hmm. You still have to understand it's a massive argument that should put some sort of question mark on our conventional wisdom. Because what we've been told is that the player will fade. The player will just run out of gas. And if you're looking at numbers that are dead even, what it means is we didn't need the carbohydrates to achieve that same exact output. So that's the starting point for us.
Yes. I think that's even an argument I buy even more into it, for the fact that you probably don't need that much. Because we know well how limited as well are those distance covered as a proper reflection of the physical input. It's so much related to context and team tactics, but at least it's the need. And in this case, how restricted have you been? How low? Like Paul, he's sometimes not even above 40 or 50 grams of carbohydrate a day. Like 1 or 2 apples, and that's something too much.
Yeah, we never.
In the how beginning, low can you go?
We wanted to make it very, very clear to everyone: this is not a ketogenic diet. It's not. We value carbohydrate ingestion. We just value it in a way where we know there's timing that's critical, and we know that there's a volume that's critical. And the way we implemented it and the way we titled it was very clearly carbohydrate periodization. We were careful not to call it a ketogenic diet because it's not. That being said, we also were clear that we weren't trying to put people in ketosis. We were trying to make people fat adapted. Those are 2 completely different things. And so from that perspective, it's really very individual in terms of when that adaptation starts to take place. If I've got somebody who's used to 400 or 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, you can cut them to 200 grams a day,
for sure,
which is nowhere near ketogenic levels, and they will start to become fat adapted. We know that. So that's one just kind of base piece of information to start with. But where we ended up is on our most restricted days, most guys were between 60 and 80 grams, something like that. And then, which is low. Sure. It is low. And then on training days where we were at a higher intensity for training, guys really didn't go much higher than 120, 140 grams during training. And then on match day, I left them alone. My particular take on it was that you've done the work in the week to continue to prime this fat burning process. And we were confident that we had done a really good job in each individual shifting the point at which they start to utilize carbohydrates as fuel. We knew that we had created glycogen sparing in the players just based on the way in which they went through what we would see in each guy as carbohydrate withdrawal. We would visibly see guys go through that. And when they came out the other side of it and they were choosing to be more glycogen depleted, even on higher training days, we knew that we had gotten to a point where we had achieved what we needed. And we knew that when we initiate exercise, these guys are probably getting a greater percentage of their energy at the start of a match from fat versus carbohydrates, and that the glycogen sparing process was at work.
Did you see any changes in body composition for those who were really changing from a high to moderate? Yep. Drop skin fold.
Yeah, it happens quickly for some people, and the intensity of like that carbohydrate flu happens quickly and more intensely with some individuals. If they're significantly addicted to sugars and carbohydrates, they definitely have a harder time in that first 72 hours to a week. But what we really did start to see in each guy was that if they were a super lean person anyway, you would still see weight loss, but we knew it was fluid loss at that point. The carbohydrate molecule is such a big molecule, and roughly three-quarters
water at the same time.
Water. Yeah. We knew that was going to happen. So in essence, what we're also seeing too is that a lot of this carbohydrate flu, carbohydrate sickness isn't actually necessarily, a withdrawal. A lot of times it's a significant sodium loss, and it's dehydration. And because you get those similar moody responses and changes in, you get joint discomfort and overall systemic feelings of illness when you're under severe cases of dehydration as well. And we're starting to see that it might not be quote unquote, this carbohydrate flu, and it actually might be, symptoms that come from some of the dehydration you can get when you implement this, especially in hot conditions where you're training under glycogen depletion, those were the conditions that I chose for preseasons and just for fitness gains. We were in hot weather a lot. To implement both of those together, there's fluid loss taking place. And so we significantly upped sodium intake the second year we did it. And we had much better responses across the whole
that makes sense.
So those all happen. I think when you see guys losing weight quickly, the most important thing, Martin, is before anyone starts, at the very first day of preseason, you have to tell them what they're going to go through. If they're surprised by it,
of course,
then now you've got a chance. There's a risk you're going to lose compliance. You have to say, listen, you're going to get weight loss, but don't worry. You're going to get moody. Don't worry. There's going to be a period where you feel like you can't run and you can't move. Don't worry. It's all normal. Because when they're in the adaptation process, one, there's no carbohydrates in the system, so they can't find fuel that way. And two, they're not fat adapted yet. So they're just out of energy. They don't have anywhere to reach down and grab anything from. And that's what forces the bodies to start metabolizing fat in those scenarios. So we're just patient with them because we know the football is going to be crap. We know that the training session is going to be awful. And those are just things that the coaching staff after the first year was just comfortable with because they knew it was going to happen at some point. And then there's just like this meteoric rise once they get past that point.
The biggest challenge with that is to have the time or the window to go through that, as you said. I've been through that path as well with players I was working with a few years ago, but we could only do that, let's say, pre-season, as a way to try something new, like putting the weight loss in advance for pre-season. But then when it's season, playing every 3 days, everyone will kind of go back and say, okay, I know I've been eating pasta for 20 years. Like let's keep the pasta in. But just to move on a little bit on another big part of the question I wanted to check with you is around the integration of the science and the research into your own practice. And I think this example that we've been talking for a while is probably an example where you had decided to go a bit against the mainstream, because if you look at even the recent review on football nutrition in football, you still have guidelines that are a bit far from what you've been doing. So the generic question I have is how much do you use research and science in your process, and then how do you filter?
Yeah, I mean, I think you use it as much as possible, right? I mean, I think you maximize it. That being said, you can, if you're going to strictly commit to a science-based practice only, then there's only a certain pace that you're going to evolve at. I think there's moments where you can start to feel that there's something new that is anecdotally showing you enough signs that you might gain some sort of marginal advantage here if we start to look to make safe implementations of something that doesn't have necessarily this scientific backing, and move and just go for it and just have the courage to do it. I think that's the whole issue with groupthink that really has the sports science industry somewhat handcuffed at the moment. Is research-based is a great tagline, and I think there's never a situation where I'm going to advocate for a group to not be research-based. At the same time, we're in a competitive environment where one of the metrics we're constantly looking at is winning. Our jobs depend on it, and there's going to be a point where you're going to want to try to give your group the best chance of competitive advantages. And I think the way we implemented carbohydrate periodization is a part of it. I think there's also some aspects of the way we physically periodize our team that isn't necessarily totally research-based. It's got its foundations in aspects of periodization that are research-based. But you at some point, I feel like what we've lacked is courage, and that's where you start to see cream rise to the top. I mean, it's vital for individuals to know the basics, to do them well, to be foundational in how they create a high performance department, how they create a high performance platform for their players. But there's a significant need. And I think it's an obligation for performance manager to be looking at, one, what can I do to create an advantage for my group? But two, how do I move performance forward as an industry? Those are things that I think are our responsibility. And I have had the opportunity to look back on my career, look back on other individuals' careers, friends of mine, the industry itself, and I've seen huge pockets of time where we made no progress whatsoever. Matter of fact, we probably lost a lot of ground, and we lost probably our reputations in a small period in sports science, where I think it was because we just bought into a groupthink idea where we do things because everybody else does things, and that's kind of the way we move forward. But research is always going to be an integral part. of how we operate and how we make players more resilient and safer. But our total reliance on it will always be a hindrance. And I think we always have to take risks and have courage and take as much calculated risk as possible safely.
Yeah, that's very nicely said. So, how do you, again, that's probably back what I was asking before. When you say that it's hindering, it's not enough. So, what are the types of research that you think should be conducted? What is the research paper that you would like to read that will kind of put us out of this group thinking?
I think the next step is there's two control centers in the human body, the brain and the gut. We know way more about the brain than we do about the gut. And we've talked a lot about diet and nutrition in this particular call, and I think this is relevant to that as well. At the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to understanding the gut and doing more work with having reliable ways of analyzing DNA to know what individual responses are, how they're different from player to player. Because I don't think, my particular model of carbohydrate periodization should just be a blanket way of doing it at every club. I think what we are finding is that there's massive advantages to understanding how to utilize it correctly for each player. But the gut is going to determine what the best individual nutritional plan is for any particular player. DNA is going to tell you a lot about individual responses to exercise. So I think there needs to be more work done to connect performance to the gut and connect performance to DNA analysis. I think that would be the next move, because brain and gut, we're starting to see the connection to that in research like crazy. But the application of the gut to performance is missing. And something we didn't talk about is, we're actually, in my opinion, slowing down the recovery process in the way we handle certain nutritional strategies. And I think it's because we don't know the gut. I think it's because we're not paying attention to systemic inflammation and how it influences recovery. If I finish a 90-minute match, I'm inflamed enough. Why am I going to add another 90 grams of carbohydrates immediately to my body, which is a turbulent molecule, which we know increases the insulin response, which we know increases systemic inflammation already? Why am I doing that? How does that make any sense whatsoever? I can get the same, anabolic response from ingestion of, amino acids. Why would I use carbohydrates to do it? Well, it's because sports drink companies are telling us we should, so we buy more of their sports drinks. Yeah.
And the window of opportunity, you don't refill at this time. 2 days after, you won't have the same glycogen. That's stuff that are still in any book, in any guide.
Think about how ridiculous that statement is, Martin. If we miss a window, we're not going to absorb nutrients. I've never heard of something so ridiculous. In that window, all you're trying to do is create an anabolic response. You're just trying to start the rebuilding process. Slow down the inflammatory effects of what's happening systemically in the body and start the process of rebuilding tissue. One of the KPIs we did track, the only thing we did was, we had basic, we had RPEs, morning subjective reports on match day +2 from 2014 to 2015, the year before we implemented our strategies, the year we did implement our strategies. And our average subjective report of soreness in 2014 on match day +2 was a 5 out of 10. And you can fluctuate between 5 and 6. Our average report of muscle soreness on match day +2 after we implemented the strategies was between a 3 and a 4. So is it perfect? No. It's subjective? Yes. But there's a huge aspect of recovery that's not getting addressed. If research was paying attention and focusing its attention on understanding the gut and the gut's response and how it influences the entire system, I think we'd be making huge strides in how we're preparing players. So that's one example. I think there's other areas where even in data science, where we can continue to develop better understandings of how to calculate whether adaptation is taking place or whether overtraining is taking place. There's a mathematics application here to the way we're analyzing information to how we prepare players. And there can be more work done to try to tie our machine learning understanding of recovery, to the practical applications of strength and conditioning and fitness work. Those are areas that can improve. Right now, my focus would be teach me more about the gut. I think we're massively undereducated in terms of the influence of the gut in systemic performance.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's obviously not my biggest strength, but I have a fair amount of at least experience with managing the recovery shake post games and everything, and it's just so complex. And the question I always been asking myself is that, is it worth fighting with players to get them have their 40 grams of carbohydrate before a match, where they just want to go home and do the other thing? So that's definitely always that's I can relate that to the practical side of the thing as well. I'm conscious of the time, and I would just, if you don't mind, I just want to finish for a few more personal things around you, and that's always good things to take home from the listeners. In terms of like looking for the information at the moment, what's the best sources? So the research, the papers, we just discussed about that, but also are you taking any course on the side, online, podcast, chatting with your mates? Where do you get the most of information based on where you are?
I think it's funny because we talked about where I'm personally at in my own growth mindset. And to be honest, because I have such great practitioners in this group, I'm not spending a lot of time trying to understand how to be a better practitioner, because it's not my role here necessarily. I'm spending more time trying to focus on how to be aware of my own faults as a leader. I think is probably the biggest thing I'm personally working on. If I can do a good job of just staying out of the way, this group is going to do fine. And management of this particular team is probably my greatest focus, and I just want to know how to do that better. So I've spent a lot of time lately just reading about really interesting people, what makes them so interesting, and trying to glean, if I can, just the smallest bit of information about how they look at things, and maybe try to adopt some of those things into my daily practice and in how I interact with people. And that's a big part of it. I think the journey to get there is difficult, and it takes a while, but I just like reading about really interesting people. Right now I'm reading a lot about Pope Francis. I just think he's a super, super interesting person. And I'm reading a book that he wrote called Let Us Dream, The Path to a Better Future. And he's a guy that does that. If you read through this whole, we've talked a lot about groupthink. I mean, this guy is acting in a way that's very, very unique for a pope, and the messages that he's delivering within the social context that we're in globally, it's intriguing to see somebody in his position speaking in such a way which could actually be misinterpreted by his own church, by the own Catholic organization. And he's speaking to truth. And I really appreciate a guy who's willing to do that in such a powerful way. So he's a guy I'm reading about. And then the polar opposite, nowhere near the religious context, is I'm reading The Storyteller, Tales of Life and Music by Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters. I'm a huge music guy. I'm a drummer myself, and so I'm reading his. It's loosely a biography. It's more just tales from his life as a musician on the road. But he's a very interesting person, man. And it's when you're the leader of a band, you're the leader of a performance team. It's really interesting to hear about how he keeps a group of 4 or 5 guys who have to create together, play together, live together, travel together every day, and keep them in a position where they all love each other. They're all family. They all love performing together every day. it's a really interesting book. But at the moment, that's kind of where I put a lot of my focus is diving into just learning more about really interesting people and how they seem to always make the right decision the first time, every time. That's a skill. And I think if we can do that in performance, especially in our environment where we get players together for such a short period of time, players arrive on Sunday and Monday. We've got our first World Cup qualifier on a Thursday, and then we go Thursday, Sunday, Wednesday, and you either qualify for the World Cup or you don't in such a small, constrained period of time. You have to make the right decision the first time as often as possible. So that's where my focus is right now.
Excellent. Very good. And the last question, I have two questions for you. The first one is, what is the question I didn't ask and you really thought I would, or you wanted to add something before we go?
That's a good one, Martin. You've talked a lot about the things that you've read about me or watched or listened about me, and then I'll return the favor.
There's a lot I don't know.
Yeah, I'll return
There's
the favor.
So much I don't know.
Say that obviously when it comes to making people fit, making teams fit, I've spent a lot of time reading your work, so I feel like maybe I'm surprised by questions about how we get people fit. Maybe we missed out on that question a little bit. I would love to do that. I'll reverse it. I'll do a podcast next time, and I'll have you on as a guest, and we'll talk about that. That's probably the question. Because listen, there's a big. That's another area of groupthink where we've just kind of fallen into this trend of I'm going to do it like this because everybody else does it this way, and managing the week,
of course,
whether it's a week where games are Saturday to Saturday, or whether it's a week where there's midweek fixtures. There's not a lot of variety, and I think it's starting to get better now. There's more individuals trying to do new things now than there were before. But I think that if there was one, I thought maybe we would dive into that. That's a question that I think we can do on round 2 when we do this again next time.
Oh yes, yeah. I don't know if you came through that because it's a proper, at least a research paper format. But we ran a survey we had 100 practitioners telling us a little bit more about their loading prioritization during the week, and this is something I'm passionate about. So I'm planning to run a podcast just on that, and probably invite 4 or 5 guests on that and discuss whether small solid games and strength, should that fit on day plus 3 or day plus 4? And the speed top-ups, when do we... Well, this is very football specific. But yeah, sure, there will be more on that as well.
Yes.
All right, and last question is, I'm going to interview, I don't know exactly when I'll manage to get hold of my great friend Nick Poulos. He's the high performance manager in AFL, in Oz at the Giants in Sydney. He's been through other clubs, other sports, Rugby 7, Australia. We work together in Qatar. So he has kind of a very broad experience of managing people. And I was thinking managing, because you are managing a lot of you have this experience in management, Nick as well. So what would be the question or the stuff that you'd like to steal from someone that has this similar management role or experience? And then I'll just pass on the potato next time when I talk to him, and I'll ask him this question on your behalf.
Yeah, I think the skill that I want to get better at is really understanding the individual personality traits of the people that I work with and how to tailor my approach to them, whether it be to motivate them, whether it be to challenge them, whether it be to give them constructive feedback. How he uses what he knows about the individual to change his approach. That emotional intelligence piece. What is it is there anything in particular that he tries to focus in on when it comes to that piece of managing individuals? Like, and how does it influence the way that he interacts with people on his staff or people within his club.
Okay, brilliant. That's noted, and
Beautiful.
I'll make sure you get the answer as well. Very good, very good. All right, so we're approaching the hour. I think that's enough for you our busy days, and I have the feeling that there might be a part 2 one day. So I think we can leave it here. Again, I can't thank you enough for all those this time. And as I said, I've been really always being a kind of admirer of your path and your words, and you've been inspiring me as well. So it's been incredible to have you with us.
I appreciate that, Martin. Those are kind words, man.
Thank you,
I do. They mean a lot. Thank you.